If you're a runner who's been dealing with proximal hamstring tendinopathy and you just can't shake that pain in your ass, watch this video and I'm going to tell you how exactly to fix that. So my name's Hugh Darnell, I'm an exercise physiologist and I helped Ellie Salthouse go from in pain with a proximal hamstring tendinopathy, getting a reattachment surgery and considering retiring the sport all the way through to the most 70.3 wins of any pro female athlete of all time. That was 6 years ago, we're still going strong today. If you have that nagging pain in the butt, right around that sit bone, typically how it behaves, if you don't tolerate sitting very well or after you go for a run, it really gets achy and sore afterwards, and the next day it can be even more pissed off than before you started. This is typical tendon behavior. What they do, sometimes when they get warmed up, the pain goes away entirely. Unless it's super pissed off, then it just hurts with every stride you're taking. Come over to the whiteboard and I'm going to show you a few key concepts you need to understand and parts of the body that aren't your hamstring that you need to control in order to get on top of this for good. So the first thing we need to understand is this relationship between our ribs and our pelvic girdle. Because if when we're moving around in space, these are moving, unwanted movement going everywhere. We call it the stack. So if we can keep this position relatively consistent and we have good awareness around it, as opposed to breaking into what we call a scissored position. So if my ribs lift up or my pelvic girdle drops down, think things like anterior pelvic tilt or rib flare, what I'm going to turn into is a slightly more scissored position. You might be thinking, why is this even important? Let me grab the red pen to show you why. The sit bone is where your hamstring originates from. And when I drop my pelvic girdle forward, my hips start to come back this way, which takes my sit bone further up here. So then when I take my leg through on a swing during a run, it's much more likely to get compressive load, which tendons hate. Tendons, it's in the name, they love tensile load, and that's the way they're designed. But when we compress a tendon, like when we sit, or when we got our leg out in front of the body on a run stride, hit the ground with an overly anteriorly tilted pelvis, or we get a loss of hip control during the run stride, all factors that can put more load in this thing here. I'll take us over here so you can see it even better, and then I'll use old Stifler the skeleton so he can kind of show you in an anatomical version. But as you can see here, this is the pelvis. We come up, this is us from side on. We can see the top of your femur coming up here, the sit bone. This is your hamstring. So it originates from the sit bone, comes down to the back of the leg. As I said before, if this comes up this way, we're gonna take the sit bone further here. And then when we bring the leg through on a swing, like we would if we were running, we're gonna put this on stretch. And if this is going this way and this is going this way, we're more likely to add compressive load around that tendon as we hit the ground, especially if we lose hip control. So if we see here, old Stiffy, this is your sit bone, hamstring comes from here down to here. If we get leg swing through and we're hitting the ground out in front of the body and we're getting this loss of hip control, that's gonna put that tendon in a more vulnerable position. If we do this over and over and over again, and this is the main reason that anything really gets pissed off, is if our load on that part of the body, the tissue, exceeds its capacity to tolerate it. So the key things with any tendinopathy, we're going to stick to the hamstring today, is as follows. So keys, number one, we want to remove the aggravating factors. What does that mean? Stop doing what is pissing off your tendon. If the stove is hot, stop touching it. If running for now is painful and exacerbates your symptoms worse than before you started, I'm sorry, but it's off the table. If running's okay, but sprinting or running at speed, threshold, sometimes running up hills because it gets that leg out in front of the body and it's harder to control and it requires more strength, then sprinting, hill running, threshold, capacity work, whatever it is that's pissing off, it's hinging can be another one. Because when we hinge through like this, again, it puts the tendon in a place where it's more likely to add compressive load. Remove the aggravators, number one, key factor, because if we keep pissing it off, it's gonna stay angry and we're not gonna be able to do the things that actually get us right long term. Number two, what we wanna figure out now is everything that we can do. And I like to view injury as an opportunity because it reframes what can be a pretty shitty situation, let's be honest, so we can come back as a better athlete, addressing all the other factors that are important. Number two, what can we do? We can start to do things like isometrics. Usually pretty well tolerated, especially in early stages of a tendinopathy. And the research is pretty clear here. It can even offer an analgesic effect, and that's a little pain reduction. So something that can be used pre-training or early stages, that might be our whole program, because it's adding tendon capacity to be able to tolerate more load, as opposed to just stopping everything. We're just gonna get weaker and detrain. So ISOs, a good place to start is 5 sets, anywhere between 30 to 45 seconds. And one of the parameters we want to use here is nothing exceeding, it's very individual in terms of what awareness is, what pain is, if you're okay with pain, if you're not okay with pain. But again, the research is pretty clear, and over helping 2,000 athletes come back from injuries exactly like this, a little bit of pain awareness, totally fine, as long as it goes back to feeling as it was the next day, the day after. So we usually say in the traffic light system, green would be anything between a 2, under a 2, no pain at all. Got our amber light, which is, obviously above a 2, up to maybe a 4 would be acceptable, depending on the individual. And then red light here, anything above a 4, that gets painful, doesn't get any better as we're loading it, and it's worse afterwards as you cool down, or the next day you've really aggravated it. Doesn't mean it's bad entirely, it just means for right now, for where we are, not appropriate. So once we've added ISOs, this is starting to add that load tolerance. Number 3 here, we could probably even sneak this in here. Some things like massage, if you like dry needling in the muscle, something like self-administered soft tissue work, it can just reduce symptoms because we get a little neurological change, and some of those little tricks just allow us a window of opportunity to load the thing up with the stuff that actually gets us right. So once we've done the ISOs, and this can even happen in conjunction, we do isotonics, which is essentially just a fancy way of saying we're starting strength work now, where the positions that we really want to focus on, again, because if I go into something like an RDL, as you can see, as I flex the hip and go forward here, I'm coming up into a position where I'm in a heavy flex position, and I'm gonna put the tendon in a place where it can be more load compromised. So typically our strength work to start, we avoid things like hinging, so Romanian deadlifts, etc. off the table, typically speaking. But things like a hamstring bridge with some load, laying on your back, feet up on a bench, or a hamstring curl on a prone hammy curl, so laying down with our hips in extension. We can do hamstring curl on an exercise ball. All these things are pretty well tolerated. We really want to use some bodyweight stuff to start, but we want to add progressive overload, adding strength, because that's going to build our load tolerance and capacity on the tendon. So once we've gone into isotonic, aka strength work, we then want to progress. If it's tolerated here, we really want to start to put in, run form analysis, addressing the full kinetic chain. So while this is all happening, think about strength, we're coming up into more power development. So strength, power, the main difference being how quickly we're performing the movement. So if you think about running versus sprinting, the velocity is the main change. So when we're going from something like strength, which is quite slow in nature, going to a power movement, it requires us to produce more force. So rate of force development work, think jumping, sprinting, those kind of activities. Or in a gym setting, we could do things like jumps, box jumps. That would be a great way of progressing strength up into rate of force development work. And we can also start to think about plyos, and they don't need to be specifically around the tendon themselves, but things like pogos, run-specific drilling technique work, super important. During this time, then, obviously when we're here, it would be like a return to train. And even though I've listed this as number 5, this in reality can happen at anywhere through this point, because what we can tolerate, training-wise, running, sport, is what we want to be doing. So if we can run, at step 2, or we can run at step 1, we want to be doing that, because the most protective factor we have for any activity is doing the activity. So if we don't have to remove it, definitely don't remove it. I like to, obviously give you a 1 to 5 here, but over this whole time, and this is what I find people do so poorly, physios butcher this all the time, it's they forget that the hamstring is attached to the rest of the body. Like I showed you with the ribs, the hips, but then downstream, how we're executing through the knee, the foot, the ankle, can also be super important, because endurance athletes are typically running, that's where they come unstuck with a hammy tendon. And if we're not addressing that full kinetic chain and working on it through our whole programming, so I'm gonna say kinetic chain work here, things like core, foot, hips. As I said, injury is an opportunity to come back a better athlete. Let's assess the athlete, how they move. We want to address this core, because then that can affect how well we're controlling and where the hamstring's going to take load. We want to think about foot strength, hip strength, because if we get loss of control around the hip, we're going to put the hamstring in a better position to take load when we're running as well. So this can be built from day one, and it's strongly what I do with all my athletes who come in with an injury. We're building a program around what they can do, not what they can't do. And this allows us, when we do get back to training, it's not like they've taken 3 months off for the hammy tendon to come back online. They're addressing all these things that are going to make them more resilient, more bulletproof, and a good athlete when they get back to their sport. All right, so if you haven't been able to shake that pain in the ass, proximal hamstring tendinopathy, I know it can be a real bother, but follow this system going through, remove the aggravators, and start restoring your load capacity, because that's what's going to get you good long term. And assess the kinetic chain, run form, super important as we're coming back for an injury, because whenever we get pain, whenever we get an injury, we get inhibition of muscles and we get altered gait mechanics. So having someone assess your run and working on this when we're coming back from an injury, super important. Part of the program needs to be run specific, isometrics, run specific skill work, run specific patterning, and this can be done from day one. Don't sleep on this, because you're going to come back, be running, who knows how you're going to be running, but it's not going to be good. It's going to put that hammy in a place where we're going to blow it to pieces day one. If you found this helpful, or if you're struggling with your hamstring, drop a comment below. I actually have a free guide and I'll flick it through to you.